to data collection. So then I will, I will talk about the challenges that I have been encountering while I've been at USC around data collection. I'll talk about the rankings, specifically Princeton Review and US News and World Report. And then Jean will move forward to talk about filling out the annual report. So let's get started with the first poll. So we'd love everybody to answer this question. Do you have someone on staff solely dedicated to data collection?
All right, I will leave the poll up for another 10 seconds as everyone's answers are trickling in. But I will say right now I'm seeing a heavy lean towards no.
Yes. And I'll be getting into this. And actually, I'm surprised, it's great to see that there's actually, 35% that do say that they have somebody that's dedicated. What's happened to me in the past, and it's happening right now, is that we, typically what happens is we do have data collection in different units, but what will happen is that when it comes time to doing something, for example, Princeton Review and filling out the survey form, then there's this mad rush to see if everybody does have the correct information. And in a lot of cases, that data has not been collected. So let's just move forward to the next slide. So, why is data important? So data is important because of, the rankings. It's important with respect to collateral materials, and basically all stakeholders who are interested in your entrepreneurship program center activities, want to know how well you're doing, as well how you measure up to your peers. So we have to answer to a lot of folks. So next slide. So there are two major, rankings that I've participated in or have, over the past, I guess now it's my third center that I am in a leadership position. So there's the US News and World Report specialty rankings for entrepreneurship, and then there's the Princeton Review survey. And then lastly, it's not rankings, but a lot of us participate in the Global Consortium for Entrepreneurship Center programming, awards, attend the conference, and so forth. And all of those award categories require that we report on data. So let's go to the next slide. So I'd love to find out how many of you participate each year in the Princeton Review and Entrepreneur magazine rankings. Okay, so we're a little bit up. Okay. Interesting. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit, that's really good information, so I can talk a little bit more about, looks like the majority of people have not participated, so I will provide feedback. And please use me as a resource. If you are interested in participating moving forward, I can introduce you to the folks who actually are in charge of the survey. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so there's a lot of metrics that we can collect that are important to your program. And I'm going to talk about different, I categorize metrics in 3 different ways. So there's vanity metrics. Everybody loves vanity metrics, and they're the easiest to collect, which is, the number of students that engage in XYZ. So it's number of students that engage in your co-curricular activities. So it's pretty easy for us to collect that information either by paper or if you have an iPad for check-in to your co-curricular activities. As well, seats filled, that's institutional research. So that's information that's pretty easy to collect from the IR folks at your institutions. Also mentors engaged, these are pretty easy. But my question is, what does that say about the quality of the programming that you're offering, right? You can report on, 2/3 of your campus participated in activities, but what does that mean? Is it good programming? Is it bad programming? What does that actually say? So let's go to the next slide. So is a better measurement of success the number of students who've participated and won competitions, have won money or in-kind awards, or the number of students who have started businesses and raised money? Or is it the development of an entrepreneurial mindset? We're seeing folks now coming out with different tools to measure mindset. So, which is the best? So let's go to the next slide. So another, what I found was really important, other metrics that can be reported on it's your qualitative impact. And these are reflection questions that you can have students fill out post-activity. And at my previous institution, I was at a liberal arts college. This was extremely important to our alumni. They wanted to really understand, what students were learning and how they were making the connections between the activities to, their, not only their personal, but their professional life and what they were going to do moving forward. And we also found that this qualitative impact, or these stories, are great for your annual report. So next slide. So what tools have I used in the past for collecting data? So of course, we're all part of Blackstone Launchpad. So we're using StartupTree. I would imagine most folks use Excel spreadsheets. We use Qualtrics forms. And now I'm lucky that we have a school-wide effort using Salesforce. So I have a Salesforce consultant that's working with me and helping me to figure out how to collect all this data. Let's go to next slide. I'll talk about this information later. So anyway, so for me, my recommendation, and again, it's from being at 3 institutions where we were not collecting everything, is to always over collect. And just an anecdote on why I think that's really important. So with respect to the Princeton Review survey, the information that is the hardest information to collect has to do with students who have started ventures, and you need to have specific information that is collected. So it's not just the name of the student and what is the venture that they've launched, but personal data needs to be collected. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. So let's just go to the next slide. So information on your venture launch. I started at USC in January, and I did not have information regarding the number of ventures that have been created by students that graduated from our institution. And the only way that you can do this in a systematic manner is to use tools such as LinkedIn, PitchBook, and Crunchbase. So we had to get a license from PitchBook, and the people from PitchBook were really nice and have helped us sort of sort through, because it's not the easiest database to use. But now I have hundreds of entries of ventures that are USC affiliated, but I don't have the personal information on each one of those CEOs that have launched those ventures. So now I have a student that's looking up each one of those CEOs to find out when the person graduated and what school they graduated from. Additionally, we have a newsletter that goes out to thousands of alum, and we are, just asking for alum to to help us out. So there is a Qualtrics survey on the back end of a question asking alumni to report on ventures that have been launched. So let's go to the next slide. So lessons learned around collecting data. As I said previously, institutional data is pretty easy. And if you participate in Princeton Review, that you have to have a good relationship with those folks so you can get that data. Student info, again, can be found on LinkedIn. And the most difficult, as I said, is finding those ventures. It's easy to find them, again, on PitchBook, Crunchbase, because those databases have record institutional funding, but it does not have informal funding, such as from friends and family. So again, you need to reach out to your alumni to find out that information. So let's go to the next slide. So as I said previously, the two main rankings are US News and World Report and Princeton Review. So the way the US News and World Report specialty rankings work is that deans and directors of programs are the ones who actually do the rankings of the business and MBA programs. And then what happens after that, the deans and directors are asked which entrepreneurship program they think is the best, and you rank them. So what happens is that those in the past who have been ranked very well and have that reputation, what happens is there's this legacy issue, and it's a factor, because there are some new programs that have risen to the top and are doing really well. But deans and directors remember, hey, I know XYZ school did really well, in the past, and rank them. So I can talk about ways to get around that. So then you have the Princeton Review survey, and all of this information is self-reported. So the issues there are that there have been schools in the past who have not been truthful in their reporting and have gotten in trouble. So again, that's why it's really important to have accurate data and not to just estimate the information, because people have been caught. So let's go to the next. So again, let's talk about Princeton Review. So some of the top, what people consider to be the top schools, such as Stanford and Harvard and Berkeley, they do not participate in the Princeton Review. Why that is, I don't know, but they've got great reputations, so they're able to always, however, do well in the US News and World Report rankings. Then you have schools like Rice University, which was ranked #1 in Princeton Review, and they have an amazing entrepreneurship program. They have the richest and largest entrepreneurship competition in the world, and they are very much connected into the local ecosystem, and they're doing amazing things. So they now have risen to the top of the Princeton Review rankings because they have been capturing all this data and are able to report on it. Next slide. So I'm not going to go into this, but this gives you the actual details on how the business school deans rank the specialty, to do the specialty rankings for US News and World Report. But again, you can ask me questions after you've read this. Let's go to the next slide. So how can you improve your rankings? I think a lot of this has to do with your program being out there in the marketplace. So what we've done in the past is we've created an impact report and sent it out to all the deans and directors of ACSB schools. You can also send your newsletters out to folks. Make sure that you have a prominent presence in social media and the web, present at conferences, sponsor conferences and events, and again, as much as possible, use metrics to show the success of your program. Next slide. So real quick, for those of you who have never filled out the Entrepreneur magazine and the Princeton Review rankings, I'm just going to go through real quick what the sections are. The first section is pretty easy. It's institutional research and about enrollment numbers, and then you have to talk about your faculty who teach the classes. And one that's a little bit difficult here is number of students who have developed business plans. So at an institution such as USC, where we have 46,000 classes, not and schools, require
Apologies everyone for the technical difficulties as Monica gets back on Zoom. We'll pause here. Does anyone have any questions on the content that's been covered so far? All right, as I figure out what is going on with Monica's connection, we can always go back to this rankings data, but Jean, do you want to go ahead and start on the tips and tricks section? Oh, wait, hold on, sorry. Monica, how's your connection doing? You're on mute.
Sorry, okay, next slide, I'm almost finished. Okay. Again, the hardest part is alumni ventures. You need to know when students graduated, when they raised the money, whether they were grad or undergrads. That's why all of that information needs to be collected. The other stuff is pretty self-explanatory. Competitions, if your students, again, it's hard for somebody like me at USC, if your students participate in competitions external to your home institution, then you have to find out that information. So it requires, they give you 2 months to fill out the survey form, and it really does, if you're at a large institution, require 2 months to get all this work done. And then there's a section on scholarship and aid. So typically this sort of information is collected through your development office, but any grant funded programs that are affiliated with studying entrepreneurship that will probably come out of your center, that needs to be reported on. And then the final section, next slide, is just qualitative questions asking, no, you went in the wrong direction, forward.
Yeah, Monica, would you be able to go over this slide one more time? I think that some people's audio cut out there.
Oh, okay. So the first section, typically you would go to institutional research or whoever runs the back end of all the courses. So you have to report on majors and minors and concentrations on entrepreneurship. Do you have a center? And then specifically, they want you to report on courses that require a team approach. Then the second section, again, institutional research can provide you with this information, which is the enrollments for all courses that have a focus on entrepreneurship. And then they want to know the percentage of students that are studying entrepreneurship over the entire institution. They also want to know how many folks are majoring in entrepreneurship. Again, you cannot do this on your own. It has to be sort of certified by institutional research. And that's why the folks that run the survey typically send the survey to the Entrepreneurship Center director, as well as to somebody in institutional research, because they want to ensure that they're getting good data, right? Then they're also looking to see specifically whether the people who are teaching entrepreneurship, how involved are they in the entrepreneurship ecosystem. So they want to know if they're on boards, have they started businesses, and so forth. So who is the most prominent of your faculty? And then again, another difficult question, if you have entrepreneurship courses that are across an institution such as USC, which is huge, there are entrepreneurship courses not only taught at the business school where I am, but in engineering, in the School of Education. I mean, there's entrepreneurship courses across the entire campus. So this just becomes a little bit, more difficult to gather that data. So I think we can go to this is the last slide. So, so then we call this, I would say at GCEC, shameless promotion. So at the end of the rankings, you get 3 different questions where you just get to talk about what's unique and distinguishing about the work that you do at your school. And, specifically this year and last year, they want to know if you've done anything specific to support your community during COVID. So, as I said, set up some sort of tracking mechanisms that make it easy for you to collect data. Make sure you engage folks in institutional research and development, and assign a lead to do this. So at all 3 institutions that I've been at, I've been the lead, but make sure that everybody on your staff that runs a unit where everybody is collecting the same information, so you don't have to backtrack, which is what I'm doing right now to get specific, all that information. I think that's it. So we don't have to go through this, but please, if you are at a center, register for the GCEC conference, and please, submit an award package. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Monica. If anyone has any questions on anything that Monica's covered, feel free to send them in the Q&A box and we'll answer them at the end. But for now, take it away, Gene.
Hi, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. We're, for the rest of the webinar, going to dive into a little more of the nitty-gritty about how to actually maybe wrangle the data, how the process of preparing for these reporting rounds, as Monica described earlier, how they kind of sort of play out. So the biggest question I hear whenever we're helping platforms or programs prepare for the reporting round is, where do I start? With all of these sorts of metrics, all of these different areas where the data could live, all of these kind of different unique combinations, unique to every program, it becomes very overwhelming and difficult to know where to start. But the easiest way is listing out every single intervention you want reflected in your report. Now, the word intervention may sound weird, but it can be thought of as any event, competition, meeting you might have had with a student, any sort of way that the program has intervened with the student's actual kind of life, or any kind of way you've engaged with them. After you figured out all of the interventions, or at least have a broad idea of where and what you want recorded in your report, that's when you start thinking about, now where can I actually export this data from? Where have I actually tracked this? Is it through email? Is it through Calendar? Is it through Eventbrite? Sometimes you may even have this data written in which case you might have to convert it to data format using Excel or Google Sheets. But really, the main objective of this whole reporting kind of sprint is getting your unstructured, disconnected data into a standardized format. And then after doing that, that will allow you to quickly aggregate it and analyze it using existing dashboarding tools. So today's presentation will really provide a roadmap on how to approach this kind of workflow. Now, reiterating kind of the roadmap that's been laid out, It's all about finding your data, structuring your data, and then visualizing your data. Now, depending on whether you already have StartupTree or not, you might have to do exports in many different places, or you might only have to export your data from StartupTree. If you're not on StartupTree, you might have to export from Calendly, Qualtrics, Eventbrite, Google Forms, MailChimp. There's a variety of other data sources that are not listed here, but really there's a lot of kind of already logged existing data. Even Gmail supports exporting. But your first task is essentially exporting all the data and then putting it all together. Now that you have all your data, it's about structuring it, cleaning up inconsistencies, very little small things, for example, like different capitalizations on emails or differences in spelling can really throw off aggregations and dashboarding tools, making it not so helpful. So I really highly recommend spending a decent amount of time structuring your data and cleaning it. After you have all your data clean and structured, interjoining or essentially aggregating it together so it becomes much more rich and useful becomes a lot easier. After that, the last step is plugging it into existing free dashboarding tools. Here we have listed two kind of ends of the spectrum. If you're a Google Sheets fan, we highly recommend you use Google Data Studio. It's built into the Google ecosystem and it's free to use. If you're more of an Excel user, we highly recommend you use Power BI Desktop. It's also free to use, and if you use Excel, it connects very nicely. Now, before I dive further into these different areas of the pipeline, I'd love to hear about what part of this data pipeline everyone's most interested in learning about. So seeing a variety of answers come in, it seems like a majority of the call wants to focus on structuring your data, but there seems to be a healthy split between also finding your data and visualizing your data. So thankfully, we have material on all sorts, on all three parts of the pipeline. So we'll continue. Now, the most kind of important part out of kind of figuring out you need the data for reporting, you've probably already thought about where to look for it. Now, with so much data probably available to you, what data is actually important? After doing a thorough analysis, cross-referencing different exports, we've honed in on the 5 most important data pieces that you could collect, or at least calculating metrics on engagement and participation are the name of the intervention, so that can be thought of as name of the pitch competition, name of the mentor meeting, the student email. Students' emails are the best way to link unstructured student data. Typically, students' first name and last name may be spelled differently, may be capitalized differently, but student emails tend to be very consistent and are very rigid in structure. The date time of that actual intervention that student is logging, what type of intervention was it? Was it a meeting, an event, a competition? And if that student in that intervention also applied to a venture or was related to a venture, the venture name. Now, venture name is the best way to kind of also link unstructured venture data. So it's important that you keep consistent spelling of all ventures. Now, the 3 main buckets of interventions that were related to those types were any active interventions you may have had, competitions, applications, RSVP surveys. These are thought of as interventions where the user or the student actually had to click on something or actively engage with something. Mentor meetings, which are usually more one-on-one, those can also be, are usually logged or registered at least in some sort of calendar system or a sign-in sheet. And then there's more thought of as passive interventions, newsletters, students engaging with online material. Those can still be logged and should be brought into the end data export. Now, I've been talking a lot really abstractly about what this data sort of looks like, but I want to quickly show you kind of how easy it can be to actually put these data reports together. So it all starts with having that intervention data, and it's all about those 5 columns that I mentioned earlier. So you see here an example of data. Here we have intervention meeting, there's pitch competitions here, there's a mentor meeting, maybe an info session that went on related to your program, another pitch competition. We see here student emails attending this. So this row would represent a student attending the pitch competition. This row would be a student meeting with a mentor and so forth. We also have date, and potentially, if you have access to, we would recommend putting the timestamp there as well. But mainly, it's just important that you have the date. Then we have classifications for the type of intervention that it is, mainly because we understand there might be multiple pitch competitions. So this is another way of helping you analyze it at the end of it all. And if a venture was applicable for this student in that intervention, we also make sure to log it. Notice that you don't necessarily have to fill in a venture name for every row. Here in row 4, it was a student attending an info session that they might not have been related with a venture in that moment. This is essentially the structure that you need to kind of mold all your different data exports into. From there, that'll put you in a much better place to kind of further build upon your existing work. So reiterating the structure of the data, it's just these 5 columns. The 2 most important columns out of all this are the student email and the venture, because this is what will allow us to enhance or kind of further aggregate our data in the next further slides. Now, how do we structure the student data or essentially build off our existing part? So in a separate sheet, kind of either in Excel or Google Sheets, I would recommend creating a user metadata, or in this case, I titled it email metadata. Using the existing emails from the intervention sheet, I asked Sheet to essentially give me the unique emails from column B, and then create a row entry for it. At that point, then all you have to do is find your Qualtrics survey or any kind of logs you have of different students' information and start adding them as columns. Here you have a lot of flexibility in adding more or less columns as much as you need. It's just important to have consistent spellings, and if you style things one way previously, to make sure you establish that consistency. It doesn't matter what standard you take, it's just important that you make sure that you're consistently spelling things the same way and titling things. So this is a just brief overview of what I mentioned, using the existing sheet to get a unique list of all the emails, and then enhancing it by manually inputting demographic or different information you might want related to the user. This same process can be repeated for the venture information that is in the intervention sheet. So again, creating a new sheet and then using the unique formula in both Excel or Sheets that lets you create expanded lists. Now supplementing this information the same way you did for the user information, but with more venture related information. Now, you may be asking yourself, where do I actually find this information? So a quick tip that we suggest for kind of jump starting, or as Monica pointed out, finding this data quicker, is enhancing your data using existing databases. LinkedIn, Crunchbase, and Google are all free and easy to use. There are premium features inside them, though you can get a majority of the useful information you need related to ventures, such as what year they were founded, the industry they work with, the team size, or who's related with that venture. Here we have provided links that essentially allow you to just input the venture name into the link and then just copy paste that URL into your browser, and it brings up an already pre-search or pre-queried kind of result on these different platforms that we've mentioned. So this is a great way to enhance that spreadsheet I just showed you that might have venture information. Moving on to the next slide. So now we have our intervention data structured, we have our venture data structured, and we also have our student data structured. We've already added in as much information as we wanted to kind of enhance it with. So now what's the next step, Gene? Where is this all building towards? So since we used emails to build the other sheet, and since we used the venture name to also build the venture sheet, Excel or spreadsheets, whatever system you may be using, will respond really nicely to that because there's consistent spellings. So actually merging these data sets together to analyze them becomes very straightforward. And just to demo how straightforward that can be, I'll do it right now live. So showing, I preloaded some queries, but mainly what this query is saying is essentially look up this student's email in the student sheet that we created, and then bring over the 3 columns of information I have there. If we had a 4th column of information in that student sheet, all we would have to do is add a 5 here, and that would be telling Google Sheets bring over the 4th column essentially. In this case, we only have 3 columns, so that's all we're going to format. And reiterating, it's searching up this student's email in the student information and bringing over the 3 columns. This will be presented and reiterated upon the slide, so don't worry about jotting these down. Just to show you, this has brought over that user-specific information. This same step can be repeated, except now for the reverse. Now we'll be looking up the venture's name in the venture sheet that we created and enhancing it with whatever venture information that we've added there. In the venture sheet's case, we have 4 columns, not just 3 columns, in which case we'll add in 4th and 5th that will tell Google Sheets essentially bring over these additional columns as well. Now, we're not done yet. All that's left to be done is to click on these blue boxes, and that will automatically apply the formula to the rest of your rows and further fill in the information as it did with the first row. Same thing can be repeated with the venture information, but this leaves us with nicely structured data that has all the information related to users or ventures, and also a log of when these interventions happen. From there, that puts us in a much better place to start dashboarding and interacting with this data set. So again, going to very slowly reiterate what happened. We're essentially bringing together these 3 data sets, interjoining them on email and venture name. It's all based around this one formula. It's very identical to the Excel one. This, in this case, is a Google Sheets one, but either way works. And depending on how much data you've provided, all you have to really do is edit this part of the formula, just to the specifications, how much columns you added or how many rows. Now that you have your data in a structured format, there's consistent spelling, everything's consistent, it's very easy to visualize this. All you have to do is connect it to Google Data Studio or potentially Power BI. Here we have some screenshots of Google Data Studio. We see all of the columns we had before. In this case, I'm asking Google Data Studio to plot student emails on the left-hand side and then put the type of interaction on the top. And then for the record count, since each row represents a student intervention, it's very easy to quickly see that student 2 went to one competition, student 3 went to a meeting, student 1 also went to a competition, student 2 also RSVP'd to an event. The same can be done by replacing the student email with a venture name, and now getting the same view broken down by venture. So the structure of the data has been optimized so you can quickly get to the different aggregated pieces of information you need. Now, to actually show you what a dashboard would look like in real time, we've prepared, using the data that we were preparing earlier in the screen share, a sample dashboard. Typically, we see lots centers spend a lot of time putting together reports on Excel or manually filtering data or putting together charts on PowerPoint. We recommend using Google Data Studio because it handles 2 pieces nicely for you. It handles actually the look and feel of the dashboard, but also the different rules and formulas that you need to prepare the actual charts. Google Data Studio also has built-in interactions amongst the filters. So let's say I wanted to find out only data related to female participants. All I would have to do is click on the female tab, and all other charts get updated accordingly. And as you can see, mainly here, we wanted to show you the different types of charts you can get. There's more than these charts in Google Data Studio and Microsoft Power BI. So this is really just scratching the surface. So now diving back in. This is another screenshot of the dashboard, but to really close off the dashboarding tips, since for the intervention data set, each row represents an intervention. Using our simple record count is how you can count event participation. Counting venture names distinctly will give you an access to counting how many ventures applied to that specific query. Counting emails gives you an idea of how many students applied or engaged with that material. And then using drop-down filters to filter through your data makes it a much manageable and enjoyable user experience when using the dashboard. The last tip that we recommend for dashboards is to stick to a 4 to 5 color pattern. Often when you use too many colors all at once, you tend to overwhelm the end user. But the biggest takeaway I can kind of hone in on or ask is that, as Monica said, it is super important to have some sort of system, whether it's StartupTree or some other system, that have some sort of system, procedure, and probably a full-time lead, making sure that the data is being logged, organized, structured, just so when you do need to report upon it, it's just as easy as inputting it into a dashboard and then just crunching the numbers that you need. That's it from my end. I saw a question in the chat, so I'm going to start looking at that right now.
And for our on-demand listeners, this will be the conclusion of the webinar today. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope you'll tune into another soon. And I'll kick it back to you for the last slide, G.
In terms of the next action steps for people on the call, if you're currently at Blackstone Launchpad School, feel free to sign up with office hours with me. On the actual call, I'm happy to kind of take a look at your data, suggest best practices, even show you live demos of using Google Data Studio or Microsoft Power BI. To learn more about how StartupTree can solve your program needs in addition to reporting, all you have to do is sign up with a meeting here. If you're currently a StartupTree user, we can actually directly export your data from StartupTree. So lots of the steps outlined in preparing for reporting won't even need to be done. That's one of the extra added benefits of having StartupTree. But either way, we're happy to help, whether you have your data inside StartupTree or outside of StartupTree.
And now we'll be opening up our Q&A segment. So if it's easier to type it out, and feel free to add it in the Q&A box. But if you want to raise your hand, I can also bring you up on stage and you can verbally and live ask our panelists any questions you have.
Hi, this is Monica. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. So I have a question. So regarding, so for those of us that are using PitchBook, so would there be a way of it sounds like, you know, there's the StartupTree platform, and anything that is on the StartupTree platform are students that are currently or have been students that have registered. So I have students or former students who have left or who have graduated that their information is in PitchBook. So is there a way to upload this information, or do I put everything into Google Data Studio? I mean, what would you recommend for me? Because I have two separate data sets around venture formation and funding.
I would recommend essentially doing a two-pronged approach. So first, collecting and structuring all the data from PitchBook, Crunchbase, your crowdsourced information. Once that's in a structured, aggregated format, maybe after the conclusion of this reporting round in July, focusing on uploading or having a student worker upload that information to StartupTree. Now, that might seem redundant or counterproductive, as they might be kind of outdated or historical student venture startups. But what that will allow you to do is not have to restructure, re-pull that data a year from now, 6 months from now, because it's already logged in StartupTree. And let's say the student founders or the founders of these original student businesses eventually maybe want to reclaim ownership over the student ventures you created on StartupTree. That's a very easy procedure that happens more times than you would expect on StartupTree. So this allows you to create a centralized digital representation of that venture information. So I would recommend aggregating it, putting it all together, and essentially migrating it to StartupTree.
Okay, and what connects, so one last question. So what connects, so for current students who have raised funds, launched ventures, I can connect via their email to the existing LinkedIn, Excel spreadsheet that I have, that I can import that information.
Mm-hmm.
For
Yes.
existing students. So the connection is the email.
Yes, and StartupTree data is already kind of aggregated and has consistent standards applied to it. So if you're working with StartupTree data, you won't have to clean it that much. If you're not working, I would keep an eye out, like you said, like keep an eye on the email and the spelling of the venture name.
Right. So it can import either by venture name or by email.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Okay.
All right. I think that, Monica, we actually have a question from you,
Yes.
from Yash.
Yes.
If you see it, I can read it out loud, but
Can you read it?
Yeah. So Yash says there's a question in the rankings of the companies started by graduates of your undergraduate institution, regardless of academic discipline, who engage with your entrepreneurship center as defined in question 8. What percentage are still in business? Does this mean that not just entrepreneurship majors, but every student at a university who engages at an entrepreneurship institute?
Yes, they are looking for, students across the institution. So, some schools will submit via the business school if their entrepreneurship center is at business school, but then there are other schools that have an institute or have initiatives that are campus wide. So you have to capture all that information that is campus wide. So that's where it becomes difficult if you're at a large institution.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. If anybody else has questions, please feel free to just hit the raise hand function on the bottom bar, and we can bring you up on stage, and you can ask any questions you would like to either Jean or Monica. In the meantime, Jean, would you be able to go to the next slide? So as you guys are thinking on your questions, we do have another webinar coming up on Tuesday, August 10th with Zach Schulman, Director of Entrepreneurship at Cornell, regarding building an advisory council for your entrepreneurship center. For all of you, if any of you are interested, I'm going to be sending the registration link to this next webinar in the chat.
And if anyone is interested in participating in the Princeton Review rankings, I can put you in touch with the folks who run it, and they can send you the survey. Again, for me, what I really, it's a lot of work, but it really, it makes you look at what data is deemed to be in so-called important. And it forces you to collect the information. And if you get ranked, it's the top 50 undergrad and undergrads. There's two separate surveys. They typically will contact you, and then you can potentially be featured in the magazine when it comes out in December, or put an ad talking about your program. So it's a great way to showcase the work that you're doing.
Jean, I believe we have another question for you from Yash. So if you know how to use Salesforce, is that less time consuming or almost the same as using Excel or Google Sheets?
It really depends on the status of the data inside Salesforce. So if, for example, you have all your user demographic information, all your venture information in there, all your interventions already logged in there, essentially it's well maintained and up to date, I would recommend just keeping it inside that ecosystem and using their internal dashboards, or I know they integrate directly with Tableau right now. But for example, if you're thinking of taking your different exports from your different ecosystem and pushing them into Salesforce and then trying to visualize them, that's when I've seen a kind of pretty high barrier to entry. It's also kind of a one-way import. I know Salesforce is kind of sometimes very particular about the data that you can end up exporting at the end of the day. So it's always very easy to put data into Salesforce, but sometimes hard to get fully generated exports. So it depends a lot more on the kind of status and how things are integrated.
All right. All right, feel free to keep adding questions into the chat or the Q&A box. If there are no other questions, we'll be closing our this webinar a little bit early and give you back 8 minutes in your day. But thank you so much to both our speakers, Jean and Monica, for your expertise, your tips, and the incredible value you've been bringing to this workshop. To everyone who's attended, I'll be sending out the recording as well as the slide deck. And thank you so much for bearing with our technical difficulties, Zoom webinar stuff. Thank you so much for attending.
Thank you.